Welcome back to Kokoro Conversations. My name's Alex Lang.
And I'm Rebekah Anderson.
And it's wonderful that you could be here today. Our conversation today is going to revolve around the concept of success. So, what is success? How do we achieve success in the world? What does that really mean? What does that look like? And I think that our conversation through this is going to delve into some areas where you've probably thought of before, some things you may not have thought of. And my hope is that from this, you might have a different perspective on what it means to find success in your own life. So I want to start by asking you the question of, how do you define the worldly version of success?
Yeah.
How does the world, in your opinion, define success?
I feel like the world defines success very much as like getting more or kind of like climbing a ladder and getting to the top. Like there is something you're aspiring toward, you want to get there, and then once you get to that thing, you kind of want to find the next thing you're chasing. So it's very much, I don't even want to say it's goal-oriented because it doesn't feel goal-oriented to me. It feels very outward.
Okay. So let's talk about people who are the most successful. So we have the people who immediately come to mind. What? We have a Bill Gates, a Jeff Bezos, right?
Yeah.
And Elon Musk, who's now the most wealthy person in the world. So, I think to most people, that would be a definition of success, would it not?
Oh, sure.
And that's primarily defined by two things. It's defined by money, of course, right? And it's also defined by the businesses they build.
Right. Well, and I think it's the businesses they built, but the influence that they have. I think maybe success is based on how much power you have to a certain extent. And of course, like the primary way that you get power in the Western world especially is by having wealth, by having money, by having resources at your disposal. And from those resources, that's where you get everything else. I mean, so when I think about all of those people, they don't just have resources, they have people that have to listen to them and have to do what they say because of those resources.
So I guess that's an interesting question. Does that define success in your mind? I guess because the question is, right, yes, they are successful by the metrics of money and they're successful by the metrics of power. Is power something I don't know personally if I always think of power as being equal to success, but it's definitely influence, right? So it's like there's this idea that if you're a successful person, you have the capacity to influence not just the decisions of people who work for you, but in some ways you're influencing the decisions of kind of like whole swaths of the population. So if you take a Jeff Bezos as an example, right? He redefined how we purchase goods throughout the world.
Sure.
Like that is that is a power, and like everybody's buying habits have now been built around literally this company that can deliver everything immediately. Like it comes to you pretty much within a day or two, anything you want at your fingertips. So I think that's an interesting thing is you look at a Bill Gates, his software ultimately, which he ripped off from Steve Jobs, which he ripped off from Xerox, they all they redefine the way that we work in the world. We all use computers on some level or another to do our work, right? So that redefined the way we work in the world. Is that influence, by definition, a metric of success? Like, what do you think?
It's interesting because I hadn't thought of it that way. Like, I guess you're helping me to see that there's another part to power, which is that if we're thinking about success and its relationship to power, if we're looking at somebody who's used the power they have in a way that's really had a negative impact on people, which I think a lot of people are...
Koch brothers.
Yeah, exactly. They're a great example, but I think this is an issue that's come up a lot with like Elon Musk. It's something that comes up a lot with anyone who has power, is if they have a deleterious effect on you personally or on the society at large, people probably, they're going to look and say that's a person who has certain success, but they might not define that person as success in the way that I think we're talking.
Amazon is a great example, right? So yes, he changed our buying habits. He made everything super accessible. But as a result, we have this issue of we're literally just becoming so consumer heavy that people are in, people are already heading into heavy debt, but it makes it so much easier when I can just go click and not even think about like, where am I with my bank account? Can I really afford this? One of the things about prior, at least when I was growing up, if you wanted to buy something, most of the time you had to physically go to a store and hand over cash, literal physical cash, that if you didn't have, you couldn't buy it. Like there wasn't, like the idea of you having something that you were buying on credit as easily as it's done today, I mean, that just didn't exist. So I think that besides the fact that people are heavily in debt, there's also the fact of the environmental effects of just so much stuff that we're buying. Let's go even one step further with somebody like Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
The way that he treats his workers has been a huge kind of source of, a lot of people are trying not to buy from Amazon because he doesn't, at least he's not really there anymore in the same way, but he didn't really pay his workers a fair wage given the amount of money that they're raking into the company. They could have afforded to pay people a lot more, particularly at those lower levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I feel like we're noticing a couple of ingredients to success. Sure, having power might be part of it, but you want a positive image in the public view. A positive image in the public view comes in part from looking a certain way, speaking a certain way, having the right things. It's very outward focused in that way. There's like an effortless look that people, I think, define as success, even if it's sort of like a duck gliding on the water. Like you see them very majestic, very calm, but under the water, they're paddling like crazy. And I do think that when it comes to somebody who at least looks good, somebody who has accrued a lot of wealth, who has a lot of power and influence and all these things, really success is embodying what someone else wants or thinks they want for their life. That's really, I think, some aspiration that comes along with it.
The reason why people look up to them is because they represent a dream that most people have for themselves, which is that you have the resources to take care of yourself, right? So they can take care of themselves to a degree that most people can't imagine, right? But I think for most of us, what we want is we want a roof over our head, right? We want clothes on our back. We want to be able to eat food as we need it and not fret about, I think medical care is a big one, not fret about like going to the hospital or needing the things that we need. So, I think that for a lot of people that, what they represent is an extreme version of what all of us want. They can just not think about money, which is really, I think, what it comes down to. When you don't have to, when money is the all-consuming kind of drive of your life, which it is for a lot of people simply because they don't have it. I think that the worldly version of success is a derivative of something that's deep inside of us and something that we all kind of fundamentally need on some level, but then it gets taken to it gets distorted in a way that is unhealthy. So that brings us to the question of what does your version of success look like in your life? How does that look for you?
I've thought about it a good bit, and one of the things I can remember from being in high school, I can remember that I sat down with a friend and she was telling me about something she was going to do. And I remembered feeling like...
Which was what? Was it drugs, sex? What was it?
It was sex. Yeah, it was. And she was actually going to... There was a guy that she really liked. He was in a relationship with somebody else. And she wanted to get intimate with him in a particular way. And it was going to cause her harm in her relationships. It was going to cause this other person harm in their relationships. It felt really impulsive. And she's a person who cares a lot about other people. And so I knew that where she was going to end up feeling, what she was going to end up feeling from the result of that kind of chain of decisions was not great. And she would probably be beating herself up.
So what's the connection to success with that?
Right. I mean, that's of course the question. And I think for me, number one is relationships. Like, I feel like the health of my relationships is very important to me. Feeling a strong connection to people, feeling like I have the ability to say what's important to me and be heard, and vice versa. that to me is a real measure of success. And I think it's a measure of success for me because it's not something I saw modeled a lot. And it's something that when I had it, always meant a lot to me. And so I knew from a young age that relationships were going to be the currency that was most potent and vital in my life. And so it kind of, unfortunately, in some ways has become my measure of success, where when my relationships aren't feeling good, I feel like a failure, or I feel like something is just fundamentally not right.
So in your mind, success is not built around material, outward things. In your mind, is that not what success is? It's just relationships?
Well, I think I would be wrong to say that that isn't a component. I mean, I don't feel right if I'm not following a certain pattern in my own life and behaviors that involves material things. I don't like to ever go anywhere not looking at least somewhat put together. Because I feel crappy and I don't like the way that I'm seen there. I am a person who cares about how I'm seen. When I talk to peers who grew up differently, that's not really something they're thinking of, to the point where when I went to my first ever job interview in college, I wore a nice button-down shirt, a blazer, a skirt, heels, had my hair done and went to the interview. And I remember I ended up doing that job for 3 years under one of the supervisor who interviewed me ended up being my supervisor for a significant part of that. And she's like, I remember you came to your interview and you're in this little suit and you looked great and you had these great answers. And I was like, huh. I mean, I would have just thought that anyone would show up dressed nice. That's and to me it was like going to a ballet audition. You wear your best, the best of what you have, because you're trying to put your best foot forward. So
but this gets into an interesting idea, right? Which is that, should society care about this, or should society care about what's inside, right? If you're not, whatever job you were doing, you were applying to do something at college, right? So what's interesting is you could have two people who are basically the same come in, but one doesn't look as put together, the other one does, right? And if they said the exact same things, probably the person who's put together is going to get that job, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You're reminding me of something too, which is that first year that I was in college. I remember I decided to just wear jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers everywhere I went, because I didn't want anyone to be looking at me through the lens of oh, this person, I like them because of how they look. I really wanted people to care first and foremost about who I was inside. And I ended up kind of changing trajectory, because what I felt after doing that for a year was, you know what, I can dress how I want and still really find people who value who I am in my heart. I like doing this. It's not just that I care about it from an aesthetic standpoint or how it influences people. But anyways, I mean, all of it is to say, I really think that sadly, our major litmus test for success is so external.
100%. I mean, in society, the thing that if somebody, I think this is a great story. It's with George Washington, right? George Washington he had a third grade education. He was basically in many ways a horrible general. He wasn't actually very good at doing the things that he did. Yet the reason why he kept getting picked to do it is because he was a really good-looking guy. He looked the part. He was 6'1", 6'2", tall, strapping. Everybody's that's what a general looks like.
Right.
That's what they thought. Now, eventually he became a good general over time. He learned from a lot of mistakes. But I think it's very interesting that oftentimes the way you appear, if we have something in our mind of this is the way a person is supposed to look, and you fit that description, automatically you'll be put into that. A lot of times that happens with CEOs. A lot of CEOs, frankly, if you go behind the scenes, they'll tell you, I didn't really know much of what I was doing, right? But they were hired because they knew how to talk right. They knew how to talk the part, walk the part. And so they basically faked it till they made it. and then they didn't end up doing okay down the road.
Right.
But the truth is that like it was an appearance. And I think that that's unfortunate because it disqualifies so many people who might have the potential to do really amazing things, but because they don't slot into some version of our preconceived notion of what it is to be that ultimately we would say, well, maybe you're qualified, but I'm going to go with this person.
Right. I mean, it makes me think about, I remember learning in history class in high school about the first ever televised presidential debate, which was between Richard Nixon and JFK. And I mean, what I can remember my teacher saying was, she's like, Nixon was like, I'm not gonna wear makeup, are you kidding me? And JFK opted to like do a little touch up before he went out there, before he appeared on camera. And it showed, I mean, like it impacted
Not
the
that
election.
Nixon was exactly a great looking guy to begin with.
Right.
And you're going up against JFK, who was a handsome dude, if we're just going to be,
for
by
sure.
all objective measures.
Exactly.
Like I think one of the things with Nixon with that was he wanted to, like, he was hoping more, like the moment you put those two side by side.
Yeah. Well, and I can remember too, it came down to like the tone where you see, I mean, and there's a lot of different things, but they were talking about just like the fact that JFK really thought through how his way of approaching a topic would appear to the public. It really was effective. And the sad reality too is that attractiveness allows people to forgive some terrible qualities. There's a 30 Rock episode where John Hamm plays the main character's boyfriend, and he's like a medical doctor who knows nothing about the human body. He does everything because it's John Hamm playing him, like super good looking guy. And so they just let him get away with like whatever. He goes to the front of a line and a long line in New York City, notoriously not willing to allow anything. I mean, it's just amazing.
But there is a lot of truth to that, right? So,
it is. I mean, it was one of those things where I think that example brought to mind like a million different things that we've all experienced where someone's simply like being good looking, it helps.
Well, from a young age too. I mean, you've probably seen those studies they've done where they have a group of kindergartners, and they bring in a teacher who is, who's very good looking, and then they bring in a teacher who's not as good looking, and they script it. They have them say pretty much the exact same things, and then afterwards they ask the kids, well, which teacher did you like more, right? And across the board, it doesn't matter what the situation is, they always choose the better looking teacher. And so there is something innate to it. Like we have to admit that it's not just social conditioning. That even from a young age, it's like your brain is kind of triggered towards like, oh, attractive is better. And some of that is just biological, right? Like
it's not a conscious choice a lot of the time, but given all that appearance stuff, I feel like that's, to a certain extent, it's really like something is turned up with that for women. I feel like men have a different measure of success. So I'm super curious. I have my own kind of preconceived notions of how you might measure success in your own life, or how you might, because I think I'm talking about how I feel pressure to measure my own success. How do you feel pressure to measure your own success?
Oh, for sure. It's almost like you can break it down two paths. You can break it down the path of what you feel society values, and to what of those standards, which ones do you live up to, and then where do you kind of veer from them in your life. So I would say probably the biggest thing, and I look back on it today and I see the influence of it, but if I grew up in the 80s. So in the 80s, if you were watching television, at some point you were going to see Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jean-Claude Van Damme, all these guys who were super ripped, super big, and they were the action stars. They were the cool guys.
Yeah.
And even before I really saw them, I was always drawn to a desire to weightlift. Like I always wanted to be able to sculpt my body. For whatever reason, I looked at those guys and I thought, that's how I want to be. I want to look something like that. Now, I was very fortunate in the sense that genetically, I do have a predisposition to be able to look a certain way. And on top of that, I also have a work ethic. So, there's a lot of people who may have that predisposition, but if they're not going to work at it, you're not going to look that way.
Right.
But I will tell you that from that metric, I definitely in some ways bought into it early. I was like, if I look a certain way, if I look really fit, then that's going to benefit me. I thought, at least initially and particularly with women. As I got older, I kind of realized, I was like, oh, guys care more about the way guys look than women do. Like actually, like if you think you're getting big and strong because a woman is going to respond to it, more often than not, you're wrong. Because I've been amazed as I've gotten older to see like women are very accepting of all like men of all shapes and sizes. Like I'm kind of blown away by it. I'm like, really? That's the one? But I don't know what you're talking about. But I think but to me, like, but other guys, they would come up to me and they'd be like, oh man, that's awesome, right? And so you realize the people who appreciate it are actually, for me, it's going to be more my own gender, right?
Yeah.
It is the males appreciate them, and they look up to that oftentimes. So I think that in my life, I saw that as something I wanted to aspire to. I definitely thought of success early on as being monetary and having things. I mean, that was very common for me when I was young. However, I think that as I got older, and I've struggled with this a lot. As a male, I think a big aspect of success is your employment, your work, what you do. I think that for men, probably, particularly if they hold work as this kind of higher value, then what ends up happening is that the thing that really brings us success, and I would agree with you, I think the most successful thing you can have in life, period now, I see that more than anything else, as long as you have your basic needs met, it is your relationships across the board. I would say that is 100% it. But if your metric of success, if it's the one you've inherited, which is often work or your job or the things that you've done, because you can have all the money in the world, and if you have no relationships, and in fact, the more money you have, the more suspicious you become of your relationships, because now why are people even spending time with you?
Yeah, they want something from you. Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I feel like you don't have to have a lot of money to have that suspicion that people only really care about what you can do for them, but it's amplified so much the more you accrue wealth. And it's interesting, like everything you're talking about is so helpful too, as I think about how I define success for myself, because I think one of the things that was really important to me at a younger age, like I found myself developing these relationships that felt really solid with people who were reliable and that felt so safe to me. And what I really didn't want was to risk them not seeing me as worthy of their time. And so I built up this idea of who I needed to be outwardly, at least, in order to earn and maintain their respect. And where I felt like I was really giving a lot of my time toward all sorts of things. I was doing all sorts of volunteering and trying to maintain a 4.0 grade average. And like I ended up being really successful in those things. And I wondered like, well, and what if I slipped? Would they still love me? And I mean, that's the beauty of losing the things that you once valued, is you are able to really see what's left behind this outer shell of everything we're trying to be all the time.
It reminds me, like in Meet Joe Black. Do you remember where Brad Pitt's talking with I guess Joe? He's talking with Quince, and he talks about his wife, who's Marcia Gay Harden, I believe is who the actress is. Is that right? Brad Pitt says, well, like how do you know that how do you know that she's the one? And he says, oh, well, she knows the worst thing about me, and she still loves me. Yeah. And Joe takes it very literally. He's like, well, what's the worst thing about you? And he's like, no. He's like, it's just a saying, like that she knows the worst of who I am, and yet she still chooses to love me in spite of that. Yeah. And I think that is like, that's kind of what you're getting at, and that is like because like that's the problem with looking a certain way, right? Is that yes, that is that initial impression, that initial value. But it is true, like once you strip it away, we all have, right? Once you strip away all the veneer, there's a part of us that is not as kind, not as good, not as giving, right? And so the question is, if I see that version of you, am I still going to like you after that? That's the question, right? Yeah. And so if I see that version of you and I still come back and I say, oh, wow, that was a bit of a rough day, let's try to reset. Well, you know that I've seen you for who you are. Like I've seen the worst that you can be, and that's okay. And I think that's the beautiful thing about family, or at least the way family is supposed to be, is that they will take you no matter what. And I think that true friendship is that way, where they will love you in spite of the worst, the worst part of who you are. And so to even have people like that in your life, that is a huge measure of success.
Yeah. Really, like, the most beautiful thing of my life is like the relaxation of my spirit that came from finding that the best relationships in my life are with the people who don't love me in spite of all the weaknesses I have, but because of them, who see that, like, not so great part of me. And I think, like, in Meet Joe Black, it's like, and it's okay. Like, they just say, it's okay. But the good thing that you find when that happens to you is that the people who are really solid, who care about you, they're still there oftentimes. And if they're not, then it's an invitation to go and seek out better friendship or to improve who you are, to really investigate what's going on here that's causing me to behave in a way that's, like, really tough on the people in my life. And sometimes it is something that you need to work on, and sometimes it's not really your fault.
Well, I think that to the degree that the world gives you a sense of what success should be, no matter what your contribution to society is, whether it's small, like, you're the guy who goes out and, literally helps sanitation pick up garbage, right? Or you're the person who created Amazon, that both people on both ends, those things that you've done, like, those things are not the function, those things do not point to success, right? When both of those people go home after their work, whether you're the sanitation worker or whether you're Jeff Bezos, the thing is, you all sit down together, you all have meals, and you all have people around you. And if those people around you are people who love you and care for you, and you want to spend time with them and you trust them, then you've won. And I can guarantee you, I think it's true, as we talked about, the sanitation worker is probably going to be able to have that better than a Jeff Bezos. Because no, I think that is true. It's like, as soon as you get to this certain measure of success, it becomes this gilded golden cage. Sure, you have anything you want. You can have anything you want. Literally, like anything, your desire, it can appear there for you. You can buy it. But the thing that you lose is you lose the ability to have real relationships.
Right.
And I think that's the interesting paradox of worldly success versus the true success that brings you joy, which we've talked about, like, through some of the other episodes, the concept of joy. If you want joy in your life, you kind of have to realize that all of that stuff all that worldly success is really an illusion. Yeah,
and I think it really points to this truth that we have to really work to redefine how we understand success. And the truth is that this is a necessity for so many people, because we cannot have every person be a Bezos or be a traditional notion of success. It's not only, like, not possible, but it's also, our world is not created in a way that allows people to be that way. And some people are wise enough to know it's all an illusion. We're here for a short time, and we have to embrace what matters most to us at any given moment. I think what is so unfortunate about the way our world is I feel that it's never become easier to buy into what is ultimately an illusion of success. I mean, we scroll through phones that are like a highlight, like, our social media is like a highlight reel of someone's life, and you can sit there and feel that you're missing out, when really what's causing you to miss out altogether is that you're sitting on your phone for hours and hours.
Right. Yeah, that's the irony, isn't it?
Yes. And then I think the other thing too is, like, you get to the level of Jeff Bezos, or you're very committed to the idea that you want to just keep climbing some ladder to accrue more wealth, to get bigger, to look better. With that being the ultimate aim, not really caring about being worth it to invest in yourself in that way. I mean, the sad reality of that is you end up sometimes buying into this idea that without reaching that level, number one, you're missing out. But number two, like, you gain enough wealth and you find it easier and easier to bypass any struggle. And you talked in a live stream later, not too long ago, about this idea that like conflict actually generates meaning. Conflict actually generates a real deep sense of connection to the people in your orbit, but it also helps you to understand someone else's suffering.
I think if we were going to summarize kind of what I think people should aim for, in my opinion, if you're going to do a Kokoro intentional kind of life, to me, it definitely has to do with seeing success as a measure of the people around you. And the people who know you, and as Quince would say, they know the worst thing about you and they still love you. To me, that is success in a nutshell. And the more you have of that, the more successful you are in life. The best life is actually found in the muck. It's found in the kind of challenge. It's found in the dirt. It's found in not looking the best. It's found in all of those things that are the opposite. You just have to be willing to buy into that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard thing is that you're being sold one bill of goods. And the other bill of goods isn't really selling itself. It's harder, but it's the real way to understand success and to find, as we talked about previously, joy in your life as opposed to just happiness, which happiness, as we said, is defined by just things and external trappings. So I hope that this has been something that you all have found helpful and useful for yourself. And if you have ideas or thoughts about it, let us know in the comments. We'll get back to you. And I just hope that you have a truly successful life, and it's something that lives up to your understanding of what success is supposed to be. So be well. We look forward to seeing you next time.